So that's a little bit about me. I won't talk too much about it. I think Srividya has covered probably more than what is here. So these are some of the things I do, and been fortunate to work in some great organizations like Tata Steel, Coca-Cola, Airtel, Conagra, Vodafone, and of course our own homegrown Hyderabad, the pharma giant Reddy Labs. And it's been a very, very wonderful corporate journey. It's around 7 or 8 different sectors, and I've consulted about 4 or 5. So I've straddled across some 10 or 12 different sectors, and which in itself has given me a very, very good experience to understand the risk in each and every sector, which are actually quite different. While the key risks may remain the same, but the regulatory framework is substantially different across sectors, and that's personally been one big experience of mine over these 3 decades. A bit of what I do now, it's more on the CFO service and governance risk, compliance, that space, and turnaround and restructuring. I'm also an IP, although I'm not practicing as an IRP or RP as they call it as of now, but I'm more focused on the turnaround and advisory and the restructuring, since I know the ecosystem of the IP. Well, IP, by the way, stands for insolvency professional, not intellectual property. I know there are many, these acronyms have many full forms. And also through some of the consulting organizations that I'm associated with, do provide some board and leadership advisory. What Shri Vidya spoke about, the startups, but it's also across many SMEs that I have actually worked with the chairman and the board of those companies. Right. So let's straight get into this. The idea of being a little quick is only to do justice to what I have, but don't worry about the content. It's free flowing. Stop me anytime. There's no target that I have to cover 20 slides, or otherwise I would have failed. It's not like that. The idea is to establish a connect with you and share my thoughts on, as Mr. Sharmaji said, and maybe take some time for questions also. In fact, I would request the secretary to probably stop me towards the end and kind of warn me if I cross time in advance, so that I can accordingly pace it, so that I leave some time for the questions, right? Yeah, so risk is I mean, you all know it, but I'm just saying it to set the context. The way I see it, risk is a probability. It's not something which has already happened, is not a risk because it's already happened, right? So if I'm launching a product in a country where that particular product could face a challenge, that is a risk. If it has already faced the challenge and I'm going ahead and launching it, it's not a risk, it's a suicide, right? So risk is something where there is a probability of a threat or damage, and that's the rest of it. I don't want to read every line. But the important point here is known is to know, or rather, what we are going to talk about are those risks which can be where the impact can be reduced through preemptive actions. And really, this one line is the bedrock of the risk management, really, because you have to manage the very word risk management, right? It's not risk elimination, it is not risk avoid. Why it's not risk avoidance, or why it's not risk elimination? Why the word risk management, right? So because you have to manage the risk, you're not talking about eliminating the risk, to preemptive action, right? And I coined this line actually, which I've used in my book also, risk, but which sometimes when you simplify things, it cuts across the business groups very easily. So I say that risk is anything that prevents or seemingly prevents businesses from achieving their objectives. So if you say like that, then it connects. I need to worry about environmental compliance or environmental restoration because it can prevent me from achieving my objective. What are my objectives? Could be my commitments to shareholders, my commitments to my employees, to my customers, etc. Those are my commitments. Those are my objectives. Anything which prevents me or seemingly prevents me from achieving those is what I call as a risk, right? And the points to ponder is, therefore, how do you manage the negative consequences of it? You can't eliminate a risk. We cannot eliminate a risk. We cannot eliminate things from happening. Okay, the least we can do is to be prepared to brace ourselves and minimize the impact of those things happening. So that's the cornerstone or the bedrock of what we are going to talk about, right? And and an ability to kind of ingrain into the business strategies a little bit of that, the response mechanism to those risks. So, is Ola Electric a risk mitigation strategy? I will leave it to the audience. Why do companies which were challenging electric vehicles and lobbying electric vehicles are coming out with a variant of electric vehicles along with the conventional petrol or the fossil fuel driven two-wheelers? Why? Why are they doing that? Is that a risk management strategy? I would leave it to you to think about it, right? So, and one more point is the very concept of understanding of risk has changed, right? So, over the years, risk was understood as something which was so manage if you can, otherwise, don't get into that area. A case in point is um, pick any new age successful startup. Let's pick um, let's pick Uber, for example, right? The company has no assets; they don't own the vehicles, right? They don't have any direct hold on the drivers. Yeah, indirectly they may have, but directly they are not their employees. They don't own the assets, right? And they are. I don't even have to talk about what they are valued at and things like that. Now we all know this has happened. Why this has happened or how they were able to do it is their perception of a risk and uncertainty in a way to make it an opportunity instead of making it as a liability, right? Another example could be our marketplace e-commerce. Hitherto, we all knew that if you have to control a market for a product or a service, you have to control the supply chain. That's what I learned that in my CA days, right? And I think one of the mantras for success for a company was buy cheap, produce cheap, and sell at a reasonably good price so that you make a margin. Amazon doesn't buy, Amazon doesn't produce, it sells. It only sells, right? And it has created the marketplace. It doesn't control inventory at all. So what was seemingly a problem to or a hindrance to growth, which is not having a control on your supply chain, is the success point for them. And how now they've created a platform and they've reached out to so many customers that suppliers are queuing up to register themselves on the platform and to be able to service the customers which they otherwise would not be able to reach on their own, right? So this is how new age business, and I've been fortunate to work with quite a few new age startups, be it in the tech or e-commerce space. Each of them have had wonderful strategies which would have been looked at as very, very serious risks earlier on, right? So that's a big change which has happened. So I just wanted to start with that primer, and then we'll quickly talk about why adopt risk management. Actually, flip through this because you all know that, and what is the modern view of risk management versus traditional view, and more importantly, why the change happened. We all know what is the change, but why happened is the more important thing. Grouping of risk, I'll probably just skim through. Recommended risk management approach also I'll kind of skip through. I'll spend a little time on the risk responses to understand the impact of an ultra caution or over cavalier attitude when you're responding to risk. I'll just spend some time there. We'll talk about risk register. We'll talk about heightened focus, and then I've got a case study at the end of it all. So that's how I'm going to time myself. I'm going to flow. Please stop me anywhere. There's no such thing like a right time, please. But ideally, it will be good if you can put it in the chat box and someone can stop me if I'm going a little too ahead and he feels the question should be answered now. So please uh, get my attention to that. Yeah. So why adopt risk management? One line, the first line says it all because of sustainability. You have to build businesses to last, right? There's a very famous book, Build to Last. So I think build businesses to last, we've probably just added there. So you adopt risk management so that you build businesses that will continue beyond the next few years, right? Because you built in sustainability as a core ingredient as a core DNA of your organization. Awareness to what can be more direct, that was more, how do I say, high level answer. A more direct way to adopt risk management would be awareness to what can prevent us from achieving the objective. So that's very simple. If you tell your business a leader, hey, have you thought of this? He said, nahi yaar, wo to hamara company secretary kar lega. He will talk of the SEBI and all those things. The moment you talk risk, they understand, unfortunately, as compliance, which is the biggest hurdle that we professionals have to cross. You have to make them cross. We have crossed, you have to make them cross, right? So you have to tell them that you need to be aware of what can prevent us from achieving our objective. I was talking to a guy in Delhi the other day, not Delhi, somewhere in Punjab, and he runs chemicals company, which is also into API. And he said something very nice, and I liked the phrase he used. He said, "Tell me those risks." Of course, he was being a little conservative. He said, "Tell me those, identify those risks for me, which at least if they not, if you advise me, if they not help me go forward, at least they arrest my fall. They can arrest the downside for me, so I don't go below this. At least protect the basement." That is one interesting way to look at it, right? That's his way of explaining what he understood by this. And then, of course, we went on and spoke to him and explained the whole scope. Focus on what is essential to achieve the strategic objectives with clearly defined risk appetite. A very key word is risk appetite. Mr. Radhakrishnan's risk appetite may not be mine. I may be an ultra conservative guy. I may not even want to go anywhere near a emerging market like uh, Russia and neighboring countries. Mr. Radhakrishnan could be a very aggressive marketer. He may say, "To hell with it, I'll go and launch my products, even in emerging or slightly politically unstable countries," right? So it all depends on the risk appetite. There's no right or wrong. It's a principle driven exercise, not a rule driven exercise. So that's something which you have to keep in mind, right? Understand the means to manage and control the impact of risk. That's a little of process part comes there, but till this time, it's all on helping businesses stay on track. The last one is a little bit more on the process part of it. Uh, Risk management is not for out. It is not a corner room job done by someone whom you pay some money to come and prepare a risk manual and some associated Excel sheets so that you can show it to the board and pass a test, right? It's not that. The biggest myth, I think, it is for business leaders and practitioners. It is not for governance experts. There is this whole myth that it is to be done by somebody. It is not to be done by somebody. That somebody can at best oversee the program and help you in the process, surely. But the risk owner always has to be the business guy. It can never be um, a guy whose function is parallel or allied to it or a support function, right? And expected outcome is obviously how to manage risks inherent in the thing. And I'll slightly skip this, and I'll rather focus on. I'll just read one line here. The traditional one was more related to insurable risks, asset oriented, more balance sheet. What exists on your balance sheet are, the very general insurance mindset, right? What exists on your balance sheet is what you need to insure, be it your motor cars, be it on plant. A little evolved of that could be workman compensation. A little more evolved of that could be your medical healthcare insurance. Like that, it kept evolving to DNO and then slowly came to the liability side. So the insurance started moving from the asset side to the liability side over the years, right? And as you know, a liability insurance is a very, very in thing these days. I was advising a technology company and they were partnering with one of the big fours, and they insisted that they take a professional indemnity insurance, right? 20 years back, had I told someone this, they would have laughed. Professional indemnity insurance for $5 million is what they wanted this company to take, right? So this is a very, very emerging topic. In insurance is completely a different area, which can take 5 hours to talk. Extremely interesting area. But the point I'm trying to make is how risk management is evolved, right? And the modern view of risk management is, as I said, it's management. It's a principle-driven exercise. You define what risks you want to manage. You define how you want to do it. You define to what extent you want to do it, right? You are not doing it because somebody is asking you to, right? It's not compliance. Okay, there where if your emission standard is whatever between 0.02 and 0.09, Okay, it's okay if you are under 0.02, but you can never be over 0.01. It's not like that, right? And risk management should connect to the strategy, and it deals in a topic way beyond balance sheet asset risks. Uh, Companies talk of environmental restoration, not compliance. That's just one example. That means you are not just supposed to comply with the environment, which is to ensure that the emissions are within standard. You're also, in some cases, in some very evolved developed countries, in some cases, you're also supposed to restore the environment condition to what it was prior to your going there. So, I suppose I'm setting up a plant in a um, region in the UK. So my one of the covenants that I have to follow is to ensure that the aquatic life remains the same before, after you come as it was prior to your setting foot on that land. So that's the level to which the risk management scope has increased. And what has caused the change? Some are obvious. Businesses were early self-contained. The supply chain, the demand, everything was localized, and therefore you need not worry too much about what too many other stakeholders are thinking. In fact, the stakeholders itself were very few, right? And then you are insulated from external factors, and you've seen how things are changing very rapidly, right? We can go on talking about it. Pandemic was just one such incident, but there are many such. Cyber was a huge cyber security, cyber crime has changed so dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. So they earlier they were completely insulated because the market was very localized, the processes were very physical, and there were less of technology-driven services and more of product-driven, right? And now the new businesses are global and hyper-connected, spans across countries. Therefore, you necessarily need to know if you are listed in US, God save you. Even if that is not the case, even if you are operating there, you need to you need to definitely follow the FCPA, right? And FCPA is not about right, wrong, this, that. It's about the process. It's about the culture. How you need to set that culture within the organization. You know, and dealing with the shifting customer preferences, big point, right? And how do you therefore manage? Um, your risk management scope will hugely change if your business model changes drastically from a business where you're probably dealing with one or two products to different products, or products being consumed by different types of customers, or products which are you're constantly changing those products and creating adjacent business verticals. So therefore, your ecosystem itself changes, and therefore your risk management also changes. Why? Because risk management is deeply entrenched in your business processes, right? Therefore, it should be looked at from a pan-organizational view, world view, not only and world view necessarily because you have at some point of time a connect. Even if your business is in India, you could be taking the money from outside India. You could be doing, it could be the debt route, ECB, or it could be a venture capitalist or a private equity guy. He would want you to do certain things someday. So the entire ecosystem and the stakeholder management changes, and therefore your risk management framework or also will change, right? I'll skip this. I think I'm talking to experts, so I don't want to mention what the different types of risk are. I'll mention the one in blue. Strategic risks are, while most of the other risks are how do I say, are thematic, are things you would like to minimize uh, substantially. Some of them, of course, you would not want to have. For example, like safety. You wouldn't. No company would like to say, "Hey, I want to take some risks on safety," or "I want to take some risks on product quality." You wouldn't hear people say that. So there, the risk appetite is usually very low. But strategic risks, the reason I highlighted this is really where the modern day risk management uh, comes out, in its full form, right? Because strategic risks are risks taken in pursuit of opportunity. In fact, I keep giving this example at times. You would seldom, it may have happened once, maybe in 100 years, but seldom would you see a company collapsing or kind of getting into serious trouble because of a strategic risk going wrong, right? On the contrary, you will find a company even closing down Lehman. So many examples that there. Satyam is there, WorldCom is there, uh, uh, which is that company, the Arthur Anderson. Enron is there. So there are many companies where opposite has played a role, where you've taken a big ethical risk or reputational risk, and you have faced an existential a crisis because of that, right? Arthur Anderson, as we all know, got closed down, Enron got whatever, we all know Satyam, we know what happened. But seldom would you find a company facing similar problem because of a strategic risk. Let's take one example. Strategic risk would be, let's say, um, okay, I'm a pharma or I'm an IT company and I'm launching a product I've built a platform in India, let's say, and I'm launching that product in some countries where I foresee could be some challenge with regulatory agencies and all. More from this is not a yes or a no. Can I do or can't I do? I can, but there could be some patent challenges and patent infringements. Yes, we may lose heavily if that infringement is the patent is challenged, and to my disadvantage, which means the patent holder loses the case, or and therefore he's not able to um, expand to that country. But seldom, unless monitoring it is so hard that you don't have anything to pull back, right? But you wouldn't really find companies, okay, it's one risk taken, gone bad, one business call taken, gone bad, right? So, but the other risk that I talked about, which is reputational risk and serious compliance risks, not the procedural delay based compliance, but ethical risks, they can wipe out a company, right? So that's the only point I wanted to mention here. I mean, you all, again, usually there are three categories. This is as per an Harvard Business Review, I think 2012, if I'm not wrong. And I have mentioned this in my book also, where I cover this. Internal risks are those which are within the control of the entity. Seemingly, they looked at risk management from a very novel way. Instead of just defining them and putting them under silos, they said, "Hey, look at it from a point of view of what is within your control, what's outside." That's two clear buckets. And the third one, they said, what you take in pursuit of opportunity. So internal would be within the control of the entity, which could be risks involving safety. I mean, surely we can provide a safe working environment. Now, whether a person, the employees depict safety behavior or not, it's not completely in your hand. But providing safe conditions is clearly in your hand, right? Providing anti-skid floors is in your hand. Providing harness in your hand, right? And as I was giving this example to someone, I worked for one company where they took the safety to such an extent. The first they started fining people, which later on now every company follows. They started fining people for, let's say, coming to office on their bike without wearing a helmet. Okay. And then they went one step further. They saw everybody will queue up because it's a huge call center, and people will all come and they'll stand right outside the gate, wear the helmet, and come in. You know then they observed it. And then they said, okay, anywhere anybody is seen without wearing a helmet, it's a non-compliant. Now, that was actually challenged. They said, how can you enforce? Outside, it's not a work environment, right? It's not a workplace. How can you enforce this? This is nothing doing. It's our policy. We are worried about our employees. So anybody seen not wearing a helmet with a strap attached, right? Wherever he is going to face consequential risk. Now, this is, of course, one step further. But what least the company can do is provide safety conditions, provide good quality of products, right? Their IP, ensure that their IP, here the IP is intellectual property, by the way, not insolvency professional. Here it is the IP that you all know. And HR, finance have good processes. The finance should have very clean processes within it. The HR should have a right hiring strategy, etc. So usually most companies have, the key word here is low appetite. Most ethical companies will have a low risk appetite in the first one. On the last one, and then we come to the one in the center, is typically what is outside the control of an entity. COVID was one. Risk involving geopolitical is another. Calamity, pandemic, tsunami, not in your control. It did not tell you and come, or you had no knowledge of it happening, right? So those are external. It's an emerging topic. Of course, appetite would be very low here, often not gauged because you don't know what's going to hit you, right? But then there are some products on geopolitical. There are some strategies you take. So if you are dealing in a country with high geopolitical risk, you limit your monitoring risk there, right? You probably collect. You don't give any credit, right? And you kind of hedge every point of time. You're as close to the market realizability as possible. So these are some of the ways you mitigate geopolitical risk. That's an external risk. Although as I said earlier, you still can, to a great extent, manage unless it is something completely unknown and out of the blue, like a pandemic, right? Um, and the
Many,
one, yeah,
sorry,
please,
Sanjeev, sorry, if I can ask a quick, get your
please,
thoughts on a
please.
quick question. You mentioned, it's a very great point. You mentioned that strategic risk may not necessarily lead to a company collapsing. I wanted to get your thoughts on situations like, say, a Nokia or say Kodak. These guys being challenged by a disruptive technology, which not necessarily. I mean, would you place that in the inadequate risk assessment or risk management, or would you put it somewhere else?
That's an outstanding point. That's an outstanding point. And thanks for bringing that point up. Yes, in my opinion, I would put it there. Absolutely fair and square. Because Nokia was, busy making. Well, I was in telecom at that time, so I have a little bit of knowledge at that time what was happening. And Nokia was the number one guy, and they kept on making the phone smaller, 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 smaller. At a point of time, the phone could be held actually like this. But then the people, as I said earlier in one slide, the customer preference was changing, and people were, I don't know whether you recall this, the phones that Nokia once brought is actually the size of this, the size of one finger, right? And and they were caught up with that, this is how we are, So I agree. So that's a poor strategy. So strategic risk is also a risk of poorly designed business strategy. In fact, that's a classical definition of a strategic risk. I did not mention it here. I put it in a more positive way. But failed business strategies or poorly designed strategies is a strategic risk. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in the example that you took, it proved to be an existential risk. I do agree there. I was talking more in reference of some calls that companies take, um, and then which proves wrong. That's okay. I mean, that's a business call taken which didn't work. But yeah, your example is right. I think the key point is the last thing that I mentioned: the rule versus value conundrum. I think I'll cover this when there's a point next. I'll kind of connect it there. Um, I think all over the entire, uh, including me, till a few years back, governance to me meant a set of rules, to be followed, right? Wear a white shirt on uh, 5 days a week means I have to wear a white shirt. I don't know why I have to wear a white shirt, right? I'm just giving an example, okay? So we always, the rule conundrum was you followed something because it had to be followed. So, and we all know the consequence, especially with Indian ingenious minds. People will always find a way of breaking the rule. I guess the why of it has got to be explained. If it's a value thing, so even if let's take an internal audit example, and if you allow me, I'll take this example here. This actually happened with me. I was 18 years ago, 19 years ago. I was working in a FMCG beverage company. They were doing some um, sale of, I think, scrap material or some such thing. And my shipping in charge is shipping used to report to me also at that time in that role. So he came to me and said, "Boss, we have got 3 coats," and we left 3 coats on material, one, two, three, right? And it's a real example, a very very interesting one. And I took one. Let's, for example, say Radhakrishna was the first one, and Shankar was the second, and Srividya the third, and the phone number of 123 345 and 678. Three numbers were given. I don't know why I did that. I picked up, let's say, Srividya's sheet, right? and dial the number there and ask for Radhakrishnan. Guess what the answer was? Oh, sir, he's gone outside. He'll be back in some time. Okay, this actually happened. Then I put the phone down. I called the guy. I said, boss, all these three quotes have come from the same guy, right? They're all just companies, different companies. And if you call one and ask for another person, he will say that he's not there or something like that. So this is nothing because we are stuck with rules. We don't know why we are doing. तीन कोट चाहिए तो तीन कोट चाहिए मतलब risk is eliminated. But what is the risk you're addressing? Risk you're addressing is so that you don't end up selling the product at a low price or you get the right value. That is the reason you're doing, right? If that reason is known, then you will not just pass it because you've got three quotes, right? So this is one example. I'm glad it just came because of a question, and because we are so caught up with rules. I'll skip this because most of you would know it. Just try to explain the process of risk management. And the risk assessment criteria is what I would like to spend a little time because sometimes, when you're not giving a criteria, the problem is, while your intention would be great, the problem is you may try to be very approximated in your approach. For example, how do you, on what parameter do you rate a risk, right? Let's say the parameter one is safety, example. Now, how will you say this risk is very high on safety? How will you say? What will guide you to that answer? It's like saying that I go and watch the film Dangal, and then Radhakrishnan asked me about the movie. I just gave him it's a great movie. But if I say 5 different acting, direction, screenplay, and dialogue, and then I say on all of this, length of the film, it was. Then he's informed. Then he says, "Oh, acha, because of this, you say it's good." So sometimes if you put a structure, things which otherwise can become a little approximated, you try to put some process around it, right? And then assessing the risk value. So again, it's something I'm not going to spend too much time, but I would like to show this criteria for sure. That's something I made for at a time when I'm actually finalizing something around this. So I took 3 criteria parameters, right? And these parameters you can use on any risk. Let's say the risk is IP, for example. Okay, then so when you're evaluating an IP risk, say, hey, I'm going to launch this product, um, and so what is the risk? The risk that the IP is challenged. So where am I on the risk? So could that breach be such that it could lead to serious inquiry? If it's a minor, small product IP, that's okay. Maybe it will not. If it is something substantial, very high risk molecule, a pharma product, then the impact could be extreme on if I am challenged by someone who already holds a patent, I'm trying to bring out a generic. So I try to use these guiding principles, I think that's the right word, guiding principles to rate a risk. Simply saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 high, 4, that everybody knows, right? But what is 5? What makes you rate this risk as 5? Or what makes you rate this risk as 3 or 2 or 1? So that's where a lot of discussion has to happen within the management. And if that happens, I think they have understood. Again, it can change. Someone may say, so Jio launched telecom product saying that they were test marketing it, and they test marketed Jio to 100 crore Indians, right? I don't know if that is a critical mass that is that can be qualified as a test marketing, right? Because they sold the product free. And someone asked why you are selling it free. Oh, we are test marketing. Nobody asked how many customers. It's about 100 crores, right? Or what, 10 crores, sorry. So 10 crore customers, how can you test market? Then it's no more test market, it's commercial launch, no? So some companies may be worried. They may say, hey, no, yeah, it's not, this kind of breach can cause a severe, consequences. So my view could be extreme. Some company will say, no, it's okay. That's okay, we'll manage. To me, the risk is still moderate, right? The safety is a little more black and white. So if you are doing something which has got a safety effect, um, will it have a safety impact on the employees, on the consumers, or on people who deal with that product? And then how can you rate the safety along that? Profit is the easiest because that can be quantified. So, and the one where the subject, where individual opinions will vary the most. For example, Radhakrishnan may say, for me, even a 10% impact on profit is not extreme. It's at best major. I may be an extremely uh, inward looking, pessimistic leader. For me, a 1% impact could be a extreme impact, you know. So that is the one parameter where there can be maximum use across different types of companies or different sets of leaders, right? I have just to try to give you some, right? And it's just an example. This is an informed view of an organization shaped by so many factors, their own worldview, their own experience, uh, what has happened to them in their own personal experience, what has happened to the organization over the year. All these will change the way they will look at an assessment criteria and how they will rate a risk based on the criteria. Another very commonly used phrase, likelihood. I mean, we all know that a risk score is nothing but impact into assessment. Some people also use an RP number, that is RPM, which is impact into assessment into a detectable score, which is ability to detect the risk. So some people say that RP and a multiple factor of all these three is score. One view. The way I see it is you take impact into likelihood, get the gross risk score, and then put in your control parameters, and then calibrate whether the risk has reduced in your opinion or not, rather than straight away calculating the RPM, right? So anyway, these views can change, but it's a very, very principle driven exercise. So a likelihood is rare, not likely. These are the various. And how do you define rare? You know, something which has happened in the past, but then that's again silly, right? Something which hasn't happened, it doesn't mean that it will not happen again, right? So that's why we put in two: occurrence in the past, occurrence in future. So we feel it has not happened in the past. That's right. So uh, it is this or that, not this and that. So if you feel that something's going to happen in the future, although it has not happened in the past, it will take precedence in rating the risk. So suppose we feel that a country where pandemic is not struck, we can create an example. Let's say country X where pandemic hasn't struck. So will they put a zero likelihood? Probably not, because they feel that similar countries like us, same ethnic groups living in some other parts of the world, were severely affected. So maybe we might also be affected. So I think the scenario is possible or likely, if not frequent or rare, right? So that's the way you, no exact science, a very, very interactive exercise, and a lot of worldview, a lot of knowledge is required. Your own ability to read things a little bit into the future. So those kind of things help in getting the likelihood tree done for a given risk. And then you have an impact on the one hand, and you have a likelihood, then you will calibrate the score, and then you get the risk. Then there is a prioritization, not always number driven. There is a heat map, and I'll quickly go there. Spend some time on the response to the risks, and then the rubber meeting the road, which is the risk register. Let's try to draw your attention to something which I've done, which I feel is, I feel in my view, it's not done very effectively across companies. So I'll kind of go there quickly, and not really. You all know how to. So management will typically prune down risks to the crucial and critical risks where disproportionate focus. The management is all about, its life is all about ABC, 80-20, right? Or 70-20-10, if we talk about ABC, right? Where, 70% on an important scale, which is a 70% usually becomes 20% in the volume or the number of occurrences scale, right? So even in a fraud study, I'm sure Sharmaji and others will agree. The If you count the number of frauds on the left side and the amounts of fraud on the right, the number of frauds will typically be in embezzlement, bribery, and all that. So millions, hundreds of whatever. Since we are talking on a scale of 100, probably 80% 90% would be that, or 95% would be that. 5% will be the Enron type of risk, right? But that 5% will be 99% of the value of the fraud. right? So that's a very simple principle in life, right? I mean, you can't always stop the last rupee, right? Save the last rupee. So obviously, nothing different for risk management. This is also ingrained in the business management, in the business processes. So it cannot be significantly different from what you employ for any other business process, right? So therefore, disproportionate attention would be given to the chosen few risks. And I'll just quickly share the risk map. And this is how you typically, again, it's not a number driven exercise. Sometimes for some emerging risks like a bribery and corruption risk, or what Sharmaji said, in the area of cyber forensic, or what are the other point you said. So that could be an emerging risk where you don't have too much intelligence, but you may want to prioritize that over others, right? Because COSO is coming out. If COSO is coming out with a, by the way, my this thing is also entirely, almost entirely based on productivity study, COSO, and the HBR. So
It is
whatever I'm
artificial intelligence and
artificial
computing.
intelligence, yeah, correct, correct. So that's something we don't know too much about, right? So does that mean we deprioritize that? No, right? So we can look at emerging topics on the one hand, we can look at the thematic risks on the other hand, and the strategic risks. So if you look at it in this way, then you will be forced to pay attention to emerging topics, whether or not it has impacted you now. Because what has happened, not happened now, can always happen in the near future, not even in the far future, right? So, so this is something I wanted to spend some time on. The typical responses to risk, and I wanted to put it this way because, as I said, this is an approach. It's a question of, and the Geo example was good. How many telecom companies would have had the gall to launch their product at zero billing for 6 months? You know, so so it's an entirely, so what I'm trying to say in this, the response is there are four types of approaches. One is avoiding this. No, I will never go the geo route. Avoiding. I will never launch something new. I'll never produce a risky product. I will never launch in a risky country. I will never, expand at a fast pace. I'd rather. That's over caution. Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong in that. The Tatas have been known for that, but Tatas, of course, have a lot of great virtues, but they've been known for being a little cautious, right? So, what could result in? I'm not telling it will happen. Could result in opportunity losses. You could cede to competition, like telecom companies completely ceded it to Geo, right? I mean, we all know that, right? Accept the risk. I don't care. I'll just accept the risk. So what if there is a risk? I launch a product in Iran. I will go in and launch it in Iran. So what if so many sanctions are there? Extremely cavalier attitude, right? Very aggressive attitude, that approach. Could be shut down, could be regulatory enforcements, could be write-offs if you don't calibrate your steps, possibly. The ideal one is the third one. I should have somehow put that in a blue line or some such thing, which is, I'll skip to the fourth one first. Share is typically insurance, transfer losses, but it doesn't mean I've insured my factory, I'll close my eyes. So that, so what? I've already insured, right? So moral hazards is an issue. So that's why even insurance companies these days say, no, boss. Doesn't mean if you've insured something, you can be careless, right? So moral hazards, inadequate care, concern could be a consequence of that. The best one is the third one, which is reduce the risk or manage the risk, right? Which is all risk management is all about. The entire risk management is about actually the third one, and not about one, two, and four. Maybe to some extent four, and to some extent one pieces of it, but certainly 100% focused on the third one, which is reduce losses and get an assurance on your achievement of objectives. That is what uh, the right risk response would be. So, fraud or other ethical responses is never to avoid or accept or transfer, but only to reduce it substantially. You can probably avoid ethical risk if you know about it, right? But if it's a business process, let's say, I'll tell you so that it's not understood the wrong way. So, let's say what I meant here is, let's say you have a business process where you deal with government officials, right? And that's a process. Just because you're dealing with the government, it doesn't mean you can't stop dealing because there is an FCP, right? FCPA, which talks about severe whatever liability on you if you are bribing a government official for or eliciting undue advantage. I think that's the right word, right? Undue favor or advantage from the government official. That's what it's. Does that mean I stop dealing with the government officials? No, boss. मुझे जाना ही नहीं है क्योंकि if I go there, I'll probably get it. But you will get it only when you do a wrong act, right? So the trick is not avoid or or the other end is okay. So what? I'll go and accept. I'll face whatever consequences happen, but I'll go ahead and rampantly entertain the government officials. So that's the other extreme, right? Or I'll take an insurance policy and forget about it. You can't do either of the third. You have to manage your business processes in such a way that you completely eliminate, reduce the risk completely of this occurring almost to zero. Because as I said earlier, the risk appetite is zero, but the approach cannot be to avoid. That's the point I'm trying to say. Not to say that you can have some risk on this. I hope I'm understood in the right way. Right? The same is true for other internal risks. The approach is different. Approach has to be always to go into certain things some way, but your own control processes, your own culture, your own ethical responses should be such that the risk out of that process is eliminated. That is the way you should look at things, right? Risk register, I'll just skip this and spend some time on the case. So everything you know about it, I'm just talking a little bit on location of the risk, where it can play out. This is something important. If you identify a risk, it's important to assess whether it has got an entity impact or just a geographical or that or plant impact. For example, bribery has got an entity impact, right? Can you say I sold poor quality products in one area, so I'm good. Otherwhere, rest of the places I'm good. It cannot be. It's an entity level because it's an ethical factor. It is not about a batch going wrong or anything like that, right? And then, of course, there are so many other things. Then you have to categorize internal, external, strategic, the way the HBR has taught us. And the most prominent impacted elements. Otherwise, how will you value it? Many people get lost till here. How would you value? You to identify where it can play a role, what it can damage. Is it EBITDA? Is it revenue? Is it customers? Reputation? Yeah, impacting what? And then the impact. And within that, then you go back to P&L and, um, reputation, you go back to reputation or safety and all, and then try to score a point there, score on the 5-point scale, a likelihood score and get a score, and then take a call. And then what are your risk mitigating strategies? What is your entity level control? What is your policy framework, tone at the top? How you're communicating to the hundreds of sales employees of a pharma company, what is allowed, what you should do when you meet a doctor, what is the culture? And then at a BU or a control or activity specific thing, what are you going to do? Or how you're going to measure it? What are your KRIs? Right? Are you going to say that for all the doctor visits that salespeople do, they show you what they did, they kind of tell you what gift they give, if at all they gave any, or have they invited. So those are entity level KRI policies, and some control activities that you do. And who is the owner of this? Most importantly, it has to be business. Within business, you can of course debate whether it will fall on which function head and all that, right? Um, and then this is something I wanted to spend a minute on. But dashboard, once you did till that, it's not over. That's just creating what you need to manage and what is the risk of what is the scores for each of the risks. This is actually what is very important. How do you dashboardize it to the board every time? And you can't go the whole 9 yard every time, right? So you have to tell, hey, these are the top risks that have been identified, and these were the controls that were identified. And some of these controls are complied, not complied, partially done. And I use a taxonomy for certain controls which I deem as extremely important. I'll probably put a red if it is not complied. Some which are an okay kind of compliance. I mean, an action I may not complied, I may put as amber. Of course, fully completed everything will be green. Don't read the red, amber, green as against complied, not complied. Okay, sorry, it's not come out that way. It's actually green, amber, red, or whatever. Green, red, amber. It's not that complied means red. It's not like that. It's just different paragraphs I've just put under that. Red, amber, green is usually and it's for each and every risk you do that. Idea is to measure the reduced risk. That's the idea. I mean, why you're doing it? You're not doing it for fun. You want to tell them, hey, we evaluated the IP risk at this, and we took these controls, and now it is. So we feel it is so much. There are more greens than reds, so therefore my score has come down from, let's say, X to Y. Right? Use quantitative methods where possible. Of course, it's not always possible to do for some of the factors. So, so it's 7. So I'll just, this one slide I had in the new normal. What are the things which are important? Data security is very important. So have you reviewed and assessed your business objective? I think the first thing with any business is to do is, have things changed? Has the goalpost shifted? Has it got further away from you? So what you thought you could run and reach a goalpost, now because of pandemic it has now gone ahead. So that's okay. So recalibrate everything instead of putting unnecessary energy into the business and on people, and with great deal of stress, so much so that the organization breaks just to achieve something you have picked a year back, right? So reassess your business objective, strategies and focus areas. Have you conducted fraud risk assessment, vulnerable areas? We can add the point which Sharmaji also said on artificial intelligence here, cyber security, IS, data privacy, very, very important emerging topic. Data privacy, as you know, I'm not talking about data protection, I'm talking about data privacy, which is largely related to individuals, and talks about preserving or handling the vulnerable data in a particular manner so that it is not compromised. Have you identified, revised your risk mitigating controls? Have you created, revised your BCP? The things have changed, right? You cannot have the same one what existed a year or two back. Have you updated your trainings and awareness programs? Above all, your risk management program, keeping in mind work from home, increasing use of technology. In fact, one of the trainings that this chapter had arranged talked about increasing cyber risk. And actually, as a matter of fact, I've heard that in many forums, how work from home is actually posing significant cyber challenges, right? Because you're not in a controlled environment, right? So, so that's again a challenge. So the IT experts have to get working on that and assess that use of technology. So how? So this is the absolutely essential that every company does that. Um, are there any questions? Then I'll quickly talk about this case, or and I kind of end with this. I know just it's 7:02. So how am I on time?
Maybe, of course, it's a small group. We can, if it is okay for you, we can extend maybe 5 minutes or so.
5-7 minutes is what the maximum I'll take to talk about this case, and maybe 3-4 minutes I'll take some questions. There was an excellent question that was asked earlier. So
members
on the
can also
strategy
mention
risk.
in the chat area.
Yeah, or if it's on a chat box, I'll try to take it. First, I'll just quickly take through this. There are actually two I thought I'll present, and I cut off the other one because I thought there will not be so much time. So there's one on a challenge which we faced when the data integrity was being talked about in a big way about a decade back. And then we kind of assessed that, and not that there were any issues, but they actually were a little ahead of the game. So we designed a complete 360-degree program, and many elements of that program and the responses that we got actually surprised them. What we told them surprised them, and what constitutes data integrity. Because data integrity is not about a black and white thing, right? It's about process adherence to a very great extent, right? It's about contemporaneous data. It's not about right or wrong, right? So we designed a complete 360-degree program. We designed a policy on what is in, what is out, what is considered data integrity. So many of them were surprised. Oh, is this integrity issue? I thought we changed it. No, afterwards. So it's changed, How can yeah, it is changed now. But suppose someone had seen that piece of paper yesterday, he would not have known that you want to change it tomorrow, right? He cannot read your mind, no? So, those kind of things. Then we had an e-learning module with the knowledge section, scenarios where we presented a lot of scenarios, artificial, imaginary, where somebody is walking in and he does not know the temperature of a particular room and forgets about it, jots it on a chit, and then goes home and next day he comes back and updates the record. But by then, an auditor had taken a picture of that record which did not have the temperature entry. And later on, when you go said, how did you write it when the day after that day when I took it, the information wasn't there. But now it is there. So how did you go back in science? So if you can do that, then you can do 100 other things. Those kind of scenarios we created. So they really liked it. It's not about good and bad, right and wrong. It is about appropriate and inappropriate, right? And then there was an assessment section and minimum 75%. Minimum 75%. It is not like your graduation degree, 40% pass, right? And an affirmation. Affirmation one was more to just say that, hey, I wish to uphold this. Roaring success, and almost 100% of the target audience took this, barring a few who took about 10 or 12 attempts. Most of them cleared it in the first time, probably few in the second. So this was a very good, I just thought I'll mention it because this is a very relevant thing, and it is not something, it's not a compliance issue. It is not something happened, therefore I did this. No, this is a classical case of a risk mitigation exercise or a risk management exercise, right? Where you develop processes where people are informed what can go wrong, or first of all, what is wrong, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, right? And that problem is the company. If you don't train employees on what is the expected behavior, so you have no right to say that you've done wrong, right? So I think the onus was. So this is a very, very good example in that sense. There are a few more, but I just thought this was absolutely an apt one. Therefore, I thought I'll speak about this. Yeah. So with this, I came to a formal end, and so these are some of the things that Srividya also said, which I do and my associations. So really, really great. And thanks once again to the ACFE team. And if there are any questions, I would love to take them.